Hello, everyone. This is Mike DeBliss. Welcome to part one of Is That Worker an Employee? Questions and answers on worker classification. We're going to delve right in. I'll give everybody maybe another 10, 15 seconds to dip in. Great, great, great. So, welcome. I'm so happy you joined me for this topic. It is one of those tax topics that has a lot of crossover with the law. And that always piques my interest because when it's just pure taxes, I feel as if I'm just solely in the left side of my brain. But here you're going to see that it's widespread and you're going to see the cross section, if you will, of compliance with the law. So let's talk a little bit about this issue. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a tax attorney. I also do a lot of criminal defense work. I had this, I guess you could call it an epiphany when I was when I was a law clerk, doing some research for a firm on a white collar criminal defense case involving money laundering. I was doing some research in the area of tax because we were filing a motion to dismiss the indictment, and one of the counts in the indictment was good old tax evasion. It's one of the collateral offenses that usually accompanies money laundering. And so I was tasked with having to do some research on that. I got really interested in tax. I had no formal background. I don't want to pretend that that I have any background, none whatsoever in tax, but it was an interesting area and it piqued my interest. And I knew that I wanted to come back to it at some point in my career. Lo and behold, an opportunity presented itself. And while I was towards the end of my time at the public defender's office, I went back to school at night and I earned my LLM in tax. It's funny how life goes because my intention was to carve a niche in criminal tax. But that didn't actually happen. It's rare. There aren't many criminal tax cases, but within about 2 months of being out in private practice, I had received an email from an enrolled agent who did a lot of work with U.S. expats and wanted to know if I would do consultations for U.S. expats with regard to their foreign tax compliance issues because a lot of them were not in compliance with this form called the FBAR. And so that's really my first entree or segue into tax law was doing international tax compliance consultations and helping to shepherd clients through the streamlined procedures or the offshore voluntary disclosure program when they were out of compliance. And so slowly I began to really carve a niche in there, but I also do a lot of civil tax controversies. So now let's jump right in. The cost of paying human capital is among the largest burdens for most businesses. For good companies that value quality employees, this is a solid investment. After all, strong workers can make or break a business. For their less scrupulous peers, however, paying for employees is an obnoxious pain that simply stands in the way of more necessary spending. So what are we doing? What are we dealing with right now? We're dealing with and this is going to be the view from the top of the mountain looking down. We're dealing with this issue of how employers are classifying their workers in a very simple, straightforward way. When an employer classifies a worker as an employee, there are consequences to that. There are tax consequences to that. What are those tax consequences? And this is going to ring a bell, I'm sure, to everybody. There is the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, or FICA tax, that is mandated for the employer to pay for each of the employees. And then there's also the federal unemployment tax, FUTA tax, that the employer must pay on behalf of the employee. Now, that doesn't end the issue with regard to taxes, because this is just the employee side of these taxes. There is also an employer obligation to pay tax as well with respect to their workers who are classified as employees. So what you might already be a step ahead of me right now, thinking, oh, that's interesting. That's going to create a liability. It's going to create a strain, if you will, a burden on the employer to have all of these employees. And therein lies the issue. Most employers would rather classify their workforce as independent contractors. Why? Because they don't have to pay the FICA insurance and the federal unemployment taxes associated with a worker when they are treated as an independent contractor. Instead, the independent contractor is responsible for paying those taxes, and so they receive basically a gross amount, and out of that amount they have to pay their self-employment taxes. So that's what's going on here. In a very practical, straightforward way, we have the situation where the IRS is aware that there are employers who it might be unscrupulously, but it might also be out of naivety, have misclassified their workforce as independent contractors when in fact they should be employees. So we're going to dive into all of this because the struggle or the tension that exists here is that employers want to have a certain amount of control over their workforce for purposes of creating uniformity and for purposes of ensuring that there's efficiency in how the work is done. Now, therein lies the problem. An employer who doesn't, or who wants to exert that amount of control, but who doesn't want to classify their workforce as employees, might attempt to force a square peg into a round hole and classify them as independent contractors even so, and yet maintain a level of control that is inconsistent with an employer independent contractor relationship. So this is what's going on, and this is why these cases attract the IRS's attention, because the IRS wants to come in and they want to right the ship after, of course, they collect on back taxes for these companies that have misclassified their workforce. So let me just, this arises in so many contexts, but when the IRS comes after an employer, it's usually because there's been a whistleblower in the form of a worker who has actually been misclassified, who perhaps was let off or perhaps is embroiled in some type of dispute with the employer, who goes to an attorney and they become the whistleblower. The IRS finds out about this. The IRS, when they do and when they start looking into cases like this, the IRS is not content to get the employer to sign an agreement and say, mea culpa, I'm sorry, IRS, going forward, we will right the ship. Oh no. The way this usually resolves